I'm your host, Dennis Horvitz, the David Letterman of the Hopelessly Damned. Tonight we want to ask the question, what is the deep, dark secret behind the lure of religion? Ken, we should cue in the spooky music at this point. To help us answer that question, we have invited Dr. Darrel W. Ray. Dr. Ray grew up in Wichita, Kansas, which is, as you may know, the heart of the Bible Belt. He is the grandson of a country preacher and the child of Christian missionaries. He expected to go into the ministry himself, but a funny thing happened on the way to the forum. That would make an interesting title for a play. Think about it later. As he was earning his master's degree in religion, he lost his faith, which is something that happens apparently not infrequently. He changed his field instead and got a doctorate in clinical psychology from Vanderbilt University, and he is now a practicing psychologist specializing in organizational psychology, coaching and counseling executives. He's here tonight to discuss, amongst other things, his book, The God Virus.
Guilt. Guilt is one of my favorite topics because everybody's got a good dose of it. We learn it from our parents. Now, guilt is not necessarily related to religion. I mean, when you put your hand in the cookie jar and your mom catches you and she scolds you and you feel guilty, that's a good thing. Keep your hand out of the cookie jar. That's the message. Play fair, follow the rules. Those are good messages that we learn when we're little children. But did you ever notice that, that cookie jar, man, that cookie tasted pretty darn good. So you started thinking about, I did the behavior, I got feeling guilty because mom bawled me out, but then a little tension comes up tomorrow, and I sure did like that cookie, so I put my hand back in the cookie jar and get another cookie. Guilt tends to drive behavior. You ever notice that about yourself? The more you feel guilty about something, the more you want it. Yeah, there's a lot of things like that. Well, religion comes along and says, we can help you. And I'm going to use a great example, masturbation. A lot of us were taught that masturbation is bad and you shouldn't masturbate and you're going to hell, or at least, I wear glasses, so, or it might make you go blind or whatever. Religion comes along and says, well, we can help you. Jesus can help you not masturbate anymore. So here you're doing a perfectly normal biological function that has a lot of imperative to it. I mean, it's pretty hard. I was talking to a guy that was in one of these classes in these groups I talked to just last week. He had been in Catholic seminary for 8 years. He said the most miserable time. He could only go about 45 days until he had to masturbate. And then he had to go to confession. And then he'd be told, you got to stop that. You got to stop me. Over and over. 8 years of that. Look at that cycle, that emotional roller coaster that's been put through. Religion comes along and it says, you engaged in masturbation, you should feel guilty about it, but Jesus can forgive you. So would you, Fred, kneel down and let's pray about this. You do masturbate, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. Just want to make sure. Albert Ellis used to say 98% of the men admit to masturbating, the other 2% are lying. He didn't say anything about women, but I'm sure he was not far off. So what happens when you kneel down and you close your eyes, you take a deep breath, and you pray? What happens? Physiologically. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's the symbolic value of it, right. But I'm just talking about physiologically. What happens to the body? You start relaxing, don't you? You're breathing deeply. You got your eyes closed. And the other person who's praying with you is probably using a nice, gentle tone. Dear Jesus, we're here to pray for Darrel and help him stop masturbating here. I mean, that's the way it works. And so you feel a sense of relief. And then the camp counselor or the minister or whoever was praying with you says, do you feel relief now, Fred? Well, that's Jesus. He just forgave you. Now keep that feeling here, because you want to remember what it's like to be forgiven by Jesus. But in fact, all that happened was you just went through what's called the relaxation response. Herbert Benson discovered it 30 years ago. It's a simple technique take 3 deep breaths and your body automatically starts relaxing. But now we compare the guilt, the relaxation, and the forgiveness by Jesus together. It's basic conditioned response. Any psychologist can do it. Any rat experimenter can do it with rats. Humans are no better than rats in that sense. Okay, I'm not going to entertain too many questions here. But I'll have questions at the end.
I just wanted to show you that I had things going.
Okay. Well, somebody told me that the proof of God's existence is how well the banana fits in the hand.
Yeah, it was Kirk Cameron.
Kirk Cameron, okay. I thought that was. Other things fit in the hand too, I noticed. So you can see that all the religion does is it takes advantage of natural biological things that are going on. It just kind of comes in and takes over that function. So now you got people feeling guilty about normal biological drives. And that's the way the religion infects you. It just injects itself through that process. The key, though, the interesting thing is you have to be taught how to be guilty. Children don't think they're guilty from the day they're born. Masturbation is not something children automatically feel guilty about. Apes, chimps, all sorts of higher mammals masturbate. Why do we feel guilty? Because we were taught. There are cultures on this earth that do not feel guilty about masturbation. Isn't that amazing? You have to be taught. So here's the kicker. The church teaches you to feel guilty about something. Then it dings you when you do it. A perfect double bind. You can't get out of it. You have to come to the church to get forgiveness. The biological drive is going to make you do it again. You got to come back to do forgiveness, and you feel guiltier and guiltier. And it's harder and harder to get the relief that you seek. And here's the way it works. Jay, I do something you don't like, and after a day or two I get feeling guilty. So I come back and I say, Jay, I got to confess, I took $1 out of your billfold while you weren't looking and got some coffee. Well, I got $5. I'm sorry, you can't get $1 anymore, can you? Would you forgive me?
Well, I myself...
Just say yes. Work with me here, Jay. Okay, now tomorrow. Okay, so you forgive me. A day or two goes by, and I go to your billfold and I sneak another $5 in. And I feel guilty about it. And I come back and say, Jay, I stole $5 out of your billfold. Will you forgive me? Say yes. Okay, you know, the interesting thing is how long does this... I mean, he could forgive me all day long. He could forgive me every time. But what's going on inside of me? I am. I'm getting psychologically indebted in many, many ways. And I'm not going to be able to get the relief. Because he forgives me does not give me the relief. Okay, the same thing works with the God virus. I pray to God to forgive me. He forgives me. In this case, we're talking about masturbation. But then I do it again. I ask him forgiveness. I do it again. I ask him forgiveness. Pretty soon you can't get the relief. But you want the relief. It just keeps driving you deeper and deeper into the religion. You can't escape it. It's a perfect double bind. That's the insidious nature of the God virus. You are never good enough. That's the message the God virus wants to give you. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. I was a tenor soloist in church. What's the message of that song? You're a wretch. You're no good. You're a loser. You can't do anything without this God. Think about that. Every time people go to church, they're singing this music. How many years does it take of constantly being harassed with that kind of music before they start believing it? They are rich. They are worthless. You heard that guy say you're offended. You offend God just by being alive. He said it. You heard him yourself. Well, that's the nature of music. Its purpose is to open the portal and infect you with guilt. As we've seen, the guilt cycle just keeps you infected. It's very, very difficult to get out of it. It's a tough thing to get out of. So, you're never good enough. I'm incomplete. I can't be anything without the God virus. And he's a guy we heard about earlier, John Piper, said it over and over again. So, have you heard this? God saved me. He must have a plan for me. This whole plan thing, that's another guilt focus. If God saved me, then I owe Him something. If I don't give it to Him, I'm guilty. It's the cycle all over again. Sex, guilt, and the God virus. You've noticed that most religions are very sex negative. They want to control all sorts of sexual stuff for you. And they want to tell you, I mean, the Pope, who has never had sex in his life, supposedly, wants to tell you how to be married. Wants to tell you you can't masturbate. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff this Pope wants to... Isn't that kind of strange? That men walking around in dresses are telling you what you can and can't do sexually. All right. So, what's the purpose? The purpose is to create a guilt pathway for infection. There's nothing better than a biological pathway for a God virus to use. Think about it. There's viruses use it. HIV uses it too. HIV uses sex to infect you. The Pope uses sex to infect you. It's the same thing. It's just a different way of hypodermically injecting the virus into you. One is a biological and one is a religious virus. It's also designed to protect and maintain the unit of propagation, which is the family. We want to make sure that everybody stays a Catholic in this family. We don't need Protestants. So, especially if you marry a Protestant, you have to promise to raise your children as a Catholic in the Catholic tradition, you know. So you might marry a husband that's Catholic or a wife that's Protestant, but you have to, if you're going to have a Catholic wedding, you have to promise to raise them as Catholics. If you do not do this, the God virus will dissolve the unit. They're all against divorce, but they're only against divorce if it is contained within their particular God virus. Mormons are against Mormon divorce. It's that simple. Catholics are against Catholic divorce. Catholics are not against Mormon divorce, especially when Mormons marry Catholics. That's fine. Get those folks out of here. And please, remarry somebody of your own kind after that. So I could go on and on about sex. It's one of my favorite topics, but I won't. I'm going to move on. And we've already covered that topic fairly well in some ways. But the focus of the God virus is to create a dissonance. You know what cognitive dissonance is? A lot of us have probably read about that in our Psych 101. And that's when you have this dissonance about here's the value I hold and here's my behavior, and how do I resolve these two? You've been taught this is wrong. Sex is wrong before marriage. Oh, we had this. Kenny was in this thing when Joplin, Missouri. I was giving this talk in Joplin. We had 5 fundamentalists from a local Fundy college show up. So I put on a little extra show just for them. And I put about 20 minutes of sex in there, talking about sex before marriage and how great it was, and masturbation. These 5 poor kids, their mouths were just open. It was fun to do that. But I digress. Okay, well let's kind of wind up this part of our presentation. I'm gonna do a little checklist for us and look at the comparisons of the viral strategies. On the left here, we see the biological and we see the God virus. We've talked about biologicals have horizontal infection strategies. We've seen that they have vertical infection strategies. We've seen it's most easily infected when young, like the measles and other kinds of viruses. Young get these things, as is religion. And we see that people are most susceptible to biological viruses when they're under stress, and they're most susceptible to God viruses when they're under stress. And we've seen that it hides from the immune system. I didn't talk about that, but we heard the measles hides from the immune system and then re-emerges as shingles. Well, that's the same thing. When somebody loses their religion and then they're not apparently religious, suddenly they become religious. It's like the virus was always there. They always had these beliefs. And if you question them, it's all the beliefs they learned when they were about 6 to 10 years old in church. They've suddenly found Jesus again. So it hid from what I would call the rational immune system. And that's what protects us against God viruses. But when you're very young, as a child, you have no rational capability to resist the indoctrination that your parents are giving you, the infection. We know and see that viruses may use vectors, and that God viruses use vectors. We see that they evolve keys to penetrate people, and we've seen all sorts of keys, from guilt to music to sex, hypnosis, all are keys to infect people. And that sex may be a way to facilitate infection for regular biological viruses and with religion viruses. So, pretty good comparison. I probably could have gone on and on about that, but those are some of the big ones. Okay, so I'm going to stop right there and just kind of say this is the end of what I want to talk about with God viruses. And I want to talk about something that's near and dear to my heart after I wind this up. But first of all, what we've done here is we've taken a look under the hood, and we've seen how the mechanics of religion operate. And in my book, I talk a lot about how do the mechanics of hypnosis work? How does the mechanics of the music that I showed you here tonight work? How do people get infected through these channels of infection that I've talked about here tonight? When I want you to go back and turn the TV on or go to church. Go to church. That's what I really want you to do. Go find a good evangelical, fundamentalist church and go watch them and see. Kenny did something I thought that was kind of... He said, I took your book and turned the TV on. And you were saying that to me. Turned the TV on, and I just went through the checklist. You could predict everything that preacher was getting ready to do by some of the checklists I give you right here in this book. It's pretty predictable how many times. So, to wind up, I want you to go look at and see if you can identify some of the things that I've been talking about here today. Now, I've started an initiative in just the recent last few weeks. We've started a new initiative. I've seen a real need for this. As I go around talking to people, I have people coming up to me and saying, man, I'm trying to get out of religion, or I tried for 20 years, I finally made it, but there's no support. So we've started an initiative called Recovering Religionists, Recovering from Religion. And we've already gotten 8 groups all across the United States. And ironically, in the southeast of all places. We've got them in Atlanta, we've got 3 of them in Arkansas, we've got one in Missouri. I mean, it's bizarre. But some of these groups they're just cropping up everywhere. I'm amazed. But people feel a huge amount of pressure to stay within their religion. Even if they don't believe, they still feel that pressure. And what we want to do is we want to open a path for people to get out of that religion if they want to. And this organization we started called Recovering from Religion is an opportunity for people to come to meetings, maybe once a month, once a week, whatever they want, and talk about the problems of how you get out of your religion. Now, they're not necessarily atheists. They may be deists of some kind. They may be theists of some kind. But they want to get out of their religion because it has insidious problems. It's caused them problems. And we think that path is a necessary way, maybe a way for them to even come into groups like this. So if we can show people, come and talk about, how do you talk to your Aunt Sue about your leaving religion? How do you break it to your parents or to your children that you're no longer going to go to midnight mass on Christmas? I mean, there's tough decisions to make around when you leave a group, a religious group. And that's what we're trying to do, is create the opportunity for people to talk about this. Where else can you talk about it? Unfortunately, what happens when people leave one religion? They oftentimes get sucked right into another one. And that's what we're trying to prevent. We're trying to help people say, okay, you didn't like what they did to you, you're a fundamentalist Baptist or Scientologist or whatever, don't go do it again. It's like AA. We call it RR. It's RR as opposed to AA. And we think ours is a whole lot more positive approach. So what I'd like to just suggest is if you may be interested in this, if not, that's fine. I'd just like to get some help from folks like you getting the word out. Go to our website. It's called recoveringreligionist.com and look at it and see if you can agree to the kinds of stuff we're trying to do. And if you do, send out, get the word out. Tell people, look, this is a way we can come together and help. Remember what I said about the biological virus gets in there and literally turns the brain off? I tell you, Ray, once that brain is turned off, it's pretty difficult to undo. The best thing is prevention, if at all possible. And the prevention is teach science and critical thinking to young children from early as you can, and don't let these idiots get creationism and other sorts of stuff like we're fighting in Kansas in the school system. I mean, critical thinking is the last thing most people want to do in teaching science classes, unfortunately. Yeah. Yeah.
Have you got any letters from pastors thanking you for helping them do their job better?
No, but I've got some pretty nasty emails from Christians. I had one that said, "Go fuck yourself" today, so that was real nice.
Well, that's in line with, in other words, they were asking you to masturbate.
Well, I was happy to do that, yeah. But question.
Do these so-called religious leaders really believe what they're saying, or are they good actors and salesmen trying to inculcate people for their own empowerment and collect money? I don't believe that they believe everything they say. I don't believe any of them believe it.
I'm not a mind reader. I don't know if they are or not, but I do know they're very infected.
Right.
And to that degree, they are infected with a belief system that they can't get rid of. And it's pretty powerful for them. And I think they suffer for it in many ways. I mean, a priest who's celibate, he's got to be suffering. That's not natural.
Is Pat Robertson really suffering?
Well, the guy's mentally ill. Yeah, he's suffering in some way, shape, or form. Read Frank Schaeffer's book, Crazy for God. He says some really interesting things about it. He knew Pat Robertson very well back in the 1980s. He's now an atheist, or virtually an atheist. Frank Schaeffer is. Okay, question right there. Yeah.
As far as do they believe it, my father is actually a pastor, and as cliched as it is, an atheist, but I can assure you, he absolutely believes everything that he says. 100%.
Does the rat infected with Toxoplasma gondii know he's infected? I don't think so. And I don't think the minister knows he's infected. Kenny.
Dr. Ray, don't you know some ministers that are basically bothered with
Kenny, that's a setup question. I know 3 ministers, and I've known most of them all my life. I knew these guys clear back in the early 70s, and I would say almost all 3 of them are as close to atheists as you can get, but they're still in positions of ministry. One's a chaplain, one's the dean of a major theological institution in the United States, and the third one is of a congregation in North Carolina. So, has been for 25 years.
Which theological seminary?
I wouldn't want to say that. Sorry. I don't want to get him in trouble. Yes, question, Steve.
Was the current epidemic threatening us? You call the God virus divine flu?
Yes, there you go. The divine flu. That's what the God virus is. The divine flu.
Swine divine.
Well done. That's a good comment. Good. I saw another question somewhere. Yeah.
I was going to say it's a pretty good bet that the terror ministers are almost 100%, they know they're full of shit.
Yeah, they probably do. Yeah, because there's not a whole lot of biblical basis for what they're saying, even though they say there is. Yeah. He said the majority ministers probably know they're full of shit. And I wouldn't, they probably are. But again, I'm not a mind reader. I don't know. I can't predict that.
Who's the one who...
Fred, go ahead.
Well, this is actually what we're doing here is extending a metaphor. This God virus is a metaphor.
Yes, right.
But metaphor shows the context in some way.
Uh-huh.
With music also, but I mean, in sense, and smells like that, it goes directly through the amygdala. These new MRI studies show that things happen that bypasses the cortex.
Absolutely.
And you have repetition and recall that's going on you're not even aware of.
That's the key. It's conditioned response at a very low level of the brain. You're absolutely right. So I don't care if someone is religious, if they believe in a God or gods. What I'm concerned about is talking about the fact that all religion is in some measure manipulative. For example, crowd psychology. You go to a football game. If the stands are full, it's so exciting. If they're not as full, it's not quite as exciting. But a full with cheers and the teams playing hard and maybe your team's winning, it creates a euphoria, an altered state of consciousness. But you wouldn't experience that as spiritual necessarily. Looking inside your brain, you'd see chemicals changing and all sorts of biochemical changes that create this experience that creates an altered state. It's similar in a church. A full church enhances the natural crowd experience. It sets people up to feel euphoric, to go into an altered state. And if you could look inside their brains, you'd see the same chemicals going off in their brains, the same synapses firing in their brains that fire in the football game. The service creates a euphoria. It creates an altered state inside the church. But the difference is they feel it as spiritual. They feel like it's God touching them or in some way communicating with them. In this particular altered state, people can be more easily manipulated into giving money or believing some fantastic things. It's a form of hypnosis, which I'll talk about in another discussion.